Okay, we'll get started here in just a minute. Go ahead and rank these topics if you don't mind as you join. My cunning plan to play intro music was foiled by technology today, but that's okay. Just discovered I have an option that's called unmute all. That looks fairly dangerous. I'm not going to push that. Okay, and do go ahead and get Slido up because we're going to be using that as we go through. I'll post the link again here. You should be able to do it from within WebEx. That should work, but for some reason it's easier to open it in the chat somewhere else. There is the link for that. Also, give me a thumbs up if you can hear okay. Let's make sure everybody knows where the reaction buttons are. You should be able to do, what are your options? Thumbs up, clapping, smiley face, thumbs down, turtles and rabbits, and fire. Okay, yes, everybody knows where it is. Okay, good. So just to let you know, you are encouraged to click on those things as we go through stuff. It makes it interesting. Also, if you've got any comments or anything, please type in the chat. It was great to see those comments as we're moving our way through. Okay, one more button here. There we go. Okay, so let's get started. So go ahead and fill out this if you have a chance. Fill out this. Just rank really quickly. Get the top 3 things that you'd like to see more stuff about. I just want to go back to this later and see what people are wanting to hear more about. Today we're going to be talking about Agile Principle number 6. So the principle of face-to-face communication. And we're going to be doing a couple things interesting today. I've got a video which I don't think I've shown before, and it's been on private, so you probably haven't seen it, a cartoon about the principle. We will also be giving away, if we can fit the quiz in, one of these shirts that is very relevant for today. We value face-to-face communication, turn your video on. So today we're going to be talking about what that principle means, why it may be, why it's important. We've gone through the first 6 of the principles, and my speed at getting cartoons finished has slowed down, which is the main thing that's been holding some of this up. So we'll get started on this today. Let's make sure my clicker works. There we go. Okay, so, oh, yeah, now it's going to try to do that. Nope, that's not what I want. Okay, face-to-face communication, Agile Principle number 6. So we're going to be talking through this. I want to get some polls, get some feedback from people to see what you guys think is interesting. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention, some of you may have gotten an invitation and then another invitation. The way our system works is if we hear back from you either saying, yes, you're coming, maybe, or no, I'm not interested in that, that keeps you from getting any other notifications. So if you ever get a notification, you're like, oh yeah, there's no way I'm going to be able to come to that, and I'm not interested in hearing more of that, just decline it, and that will keep you from getting more notifications about that event. If you think you're interested, but you're not sure you can come, go and click on the maybe. That just tells our system how many people were interested in it, even if they can't come. And if you go ahead and say that you do plan to come, that's great. That gives us an idea of how many people will be there. But what we're trying to do is make it to where if people just gets lost in their inbox or something, we might send it again to them, but we don't want to send it out to people that are planning and it is on their calendar. So that should work that way. If you see something else, feel free to let me know if on your end it's not acting the way I just described. Okay, face-to-face communication, Agile Principle number 6. Let me post this one more time here and make sure everybody's got the link for Slido, or you can do it inside the app. Okay, most of your team's development work involves which of these 3 things? So if you had to categorize most of your team's development work, would it be that they spend most of their time hooking cloud services together to enable functionality, writing large amounts of standalone code, things that aren't necessarily using cloud technology, or writing complicated algorithms? So what describes most of your team's development work? Is it using things in the cloud where you're using, like, for example, with AWS, and maybe you're using the databases in the cloud and you use some of those other services, and in that case, a lot of time is probably spent trying to get the systems to talk to each other. Or you're spending more time writing standalone code that's going to be deployed probably on-prem. You're not really worried about using cloud services for it. Okay, and it looks like that's interesting. I thought we would have a little bit more on the hooking cloud services together to enable functionality. So that's kind of interesting. I'll leave out there just a few more minutes, give a few more answers in. And please go ahead and bring this up. We're going to be using it as we go through, and it'll be a lot more interesting to get everybody's input on things. Okay, so it looks like most of it, we've got a lot of people doing stuff in the cloud. We've got more people doing large amounts of standalone code, standalone applications. And then we've actually got some people writing complicated algorithms. So next question, what type of work benefits the most from face-to-face communication in your viewpoint? Creating cloud-based application, complicated algorithms, or standalone systems? Oh, that should be standalone. I misspelled it. And there is not a right answer there. I'm just trying to get us thinking about what types of things benefit most from face-to-face communication. Because I think we could probably make a case that in many situations, all of these things are going to benefit from face-to-face communication. One thing, though, that I see oftentimes, and this is interesting because this is cloud-based applications being at the bottom, is something I've experienced on a lot of teams I've worked with, where there's this idea that doing stuff in the cloud that maybe we don't need as much intense collaboration. My experience has actually been the opposite of that. And the thing that holds you up, or the things that actually slows your cycle time down in the cloud, is usually because you don't have really, really good rapid communication turnaround. And the reason is because there's usually so many moving pieces. You may have security you got to deal with. You may have a different group that you're dealing with deploying stuff. That the longer the communication has to happen and the slower the cycle time is, it has an exponential effect in how it can slow down your project. And like I said, there's not a right answer here. All of these things can benefit from face-to-face communication. The other thing I've seen a lot with creating cloud-based application is you're spending oftentimes a lot less time actually writing code and a lot more time just trying to figure out, how do I say this particular thing to get service A to talk to service B so it will produce this thing over here. The teams I've seen that are most effective are leveraging the face-to-face communication to where they may have 2 or 3 people working on something together. Very, very intense collaboration, because everybody has experienced a slightly different part of things, and everybody has different ideas. So as they run into a block, instead of one person being down for 8 hours waiting for it, they can get through maybe in 10 minutes because they get 5 or 6 ideas. They talk through them. They try the ones that seem the most promising. And that has a very significant cumulative effect on how fast the team is able to go by that face-to-face communication. If you try to do the same thing, but you separate people and they're trying to email back and forth different ideas, and you have things like, yesterday I tried this for 8 hours and it didn't work. Does anyone have any ideas? And somebody says, oh, well, try doing this. And then 20 minutes later, there's an email back saying, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you I did try doing that and it doesn't work because of this, this, and this. That's a very inefficient way to work. And this Agile principle, I think, is probably even more true now than when it was written, just because the way we do software development now versus the way we did it when the Agile Manifesto was written. So the principle here is the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. So let's go through and look at, kind of dig into this a little more. So the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. This implies that there are other ways we could communicate. There are other methods, and Agile is taking a stand that's saying the most efficient way is actually to do face-to-face conversation. So if you look back at Agile Manifesto, it says we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. So that's the mentality they have, is, hey, we've tried a lot of things and here's what we found worked best. And one of those things were, this is the most efficient and effective method of conveying information. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but that implies a lot of things for this group of people, what they were doing. Now, you could come along and say, if you were to say, we're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it, and we found another way that's better a better way to communicate. And Astrid, that's a good point. We'll talk about that in just a minute, right? We're uncovering better ways, and you've actually uncovered a better way that's actually provably better. That's great. When we say face-to-face, does it mean in person or in front of a camera too? I include being in front of a camera because if I can see your face, I'm having face-to-face conversation. That doesn't diminish the value of in person. It's still very, very important. But if you had to choose between people communicating by email versus people communicating on video, the video is much, much closer to what they're describing here as being efficient. So the most efficient. So let's think about efficient. What does efficient mean? Well, if we go to the dictionary, it says capable of producing desired results with little or no waste as of time or materials. So there may be other ways of producing the desired results, but what Agile is saying is the most efficient way, so the way that produces the least waste, is to communicate face-to-face. So here's a question. Now this will seem off the wall, but this actually is going somewhere. How efficient is your air conditioning unit in your house or apartment, wherever you live? And if you don't know, just guess. Is it poor, okay, good, great, incredible, alien technology? So these are SEER ratings, and that's how air conditioners are rated and how efficient they are. So what do you think? And if you're not sure what the SEER rating is, based on your electric bill, how efficient do you think your AC is? Is it good, great, okay, incredible, alien technology, or you don't have any air conditioner? And so while you're voting on this, air conditioning is kind of an interesting thing, right? What it actually is doing is taking the heat out of your house and throwing it outside one way or another. Whether it's a window unit, whether it's a big unit outside. We've got a geothermal unit, so it actually takes the heat out of the house, puts some of it in the hot water tank, and sticks the rest of it into the ground. And then during the winter, it pulls the heat back out of the ground. Okay, so most of us are feeling pretty good about our HVAC, 16 to 20, and that's a really good rating. It wasn't that long ago that 16 to 20 was a really hard rating to get. We've come a long ways in making air conditioning more efficient. So this is something interesting. So if we're thinking of something being most efficient, here's a bunch of air conditioners that are all 3-ton units. So at the very top, we've got left over there, we've got a 3-ton unit, and it's 13 SEER. And then we've got a 14.3, another 14.3, 5.2, or 15.2. Down here we've got 17.2, and I think that's the highest we've got for these. Now, do you notice something about these different air conditions as we move through them? Let me see, no, okay. Yeah, what's different? They're different SEER ratings, but there's another very important difference. Do you notice that? What's the other big difference with these? Just throw it in the chat. Yes, price, right? So over here we've got a 3-ton 13 SEER unit going for $1,900, and here we've got a 3-ton 17.2 SEER unit that's going for $4,500. And I think that's very important. When we talk about something being efficient, we can't ignore the price, right? What is it costing me to do this? Because if I just say, oh, I've got this really efficient air conditioner and it costs $2 million, a slightly less efficient one that cost me $1,500 is probably going to be more efficient for the things that are valuable to me, because price is one of them. Now, we have, here at our house, we have our unit, it's a water furnace, it's rated at about 28 plus SEER. I think the newer units are 30 or something like that. But this unit came at a very different cost. If we were only planning on being here for a year, this would have been a horrible unit to put in, because here's what it took to actually put this unit in. We had to get a truck. These are my kids. This was about, let's see, it's still under warranty. So this was just about 10 years ago, I guess. So just under 10 years ago. And they had to bring in this giant drilling truck and then do this. So we have these 3 wells that go way down into the ground with a loop that goes down into it to push the heat to the ground. And my point of this is there is to say that our furnace is more efficient, there is a lot of work that goes into making this work. It was a very expensive system to put in, but if we're here long enough, it's very, very efficient. So the point being that to say that something's efficient, the people that wrote the Agile Manifesto were saying, this is worth investing in. Yes, it's going to cost something, but it's the most efficient way we've found, meaning for what we put in. Glad to see you trash your. It actually looks great and beautiful now. It grew back really, really nice. But yes, it made a made a huge mess. And these wells go down like 200 feet, so it's down into rock just pulling stuff, and then they bring in this special type of mud that does thermal. It's a very fascinating thing. Anyway, so in thinking of that, which is more efficient here? Which would you consider to be more efficient? You got a $6,000 HVAC system that costs $1,200 per year to run versus a $90,000 HVAC system that costs $1,100 per year to run. So technically we could say, oh, this one costs less to run, assuming it keeps things at the same temperature, right? We could say this one costs less to run. It uses less energy, evidently, to run it. But if we don't take into account that it costs so much more to put in, we'll probably think of something as being efficient when it's not actually, at least depending on how we want to define it. Now, I'd assume if it costs $90,000 to put in, there's probably a whole lot of energy that goes into the manufacture of it. Depending on how long we expect this to last, if we expect it to last, oh, I don't know, 20 years or something like that, the initial investment on that $90,000, you're probably not going to earn that back. And so if we assume that the proxy for how much energy goes into something is the dollars that goes into it, the $6,000 one may actually be more efficient overall. Now, this isn't I'm not an expert on air conditioners, obviously, but my point is we need to think about what are we willing to put into something versus what we get out of it. And I think it's very fascinating to see that the people that wrote the Agile Manifesto were saying this is actually efficient, this is worth investing in. So to say something is efficient means it costs less than the value it produced for the total picture of cost. Agile says that face-to-face communication, in their experience, because remember they said they're discovering ways of working, that it provides more value than what it costs. The most efficient and effective. So what does it mean to be effective? Well, to be effective means it produces the desired results. And the thing I like about this word being in here is you need to know what the desired result is, right? You need to know what you're trying to accomplish before you can tell if something's effective. You know, I just had a system click on over here. Let me turn it off because it's kind of noisy. Sorry about that. It may have filtered it out for you, but it was annoying for me. Okay, so to say something is effective means that it's produced that we know what we're trying to achieve. And that sounds like a no-brainer, but I've worked with a lot of teams that are not really clear what their goal is. And when you're not clear what your goal is, it's very hard to tell if you're achieving it. So if you're trying to say that face-to-face communication is effective or is efficient and effective, you're going to run into a lot of people disagreeing with you unless you actually have a clear idea of what you're trying to accomplish, which probably is going to be getting working software into the customer's hands. But that's not always, when you really look at how teams are working, that's not always the primary thing that's driving them. Here's an interesting story, just thinking about something being effective. So this was in Vancouver, BC. This is from the Associated Press. It was a story from, I don't know, the book was published in the 90s, so it was sometime before that. The port development was watching with disappointment as firemen extinguished a 3-alarm blaze at an abandoned waterfront pier. I kept telling them to let it burn, Rathy said, noting that the pier had been scheduled for demolition by the National Harbors Board. The firemen's quick action will cost the Harbors Board $45,000, the price of demolition. So in this particular story, this pier caught on fire, and the person that kind of knew what was going on was like, yeah, just let it burn. We were trying to get rid of that anyway. But these very efficient, very effective fire department came in and put it out very, very effectively. The point of this story was I was just looking for a story that kind of illustrated when somebody accomplished something efficiently and effectively, but it wasn't really part of the overall goal. Another story, just kind of help us remember this. I have a friend here in town years ago. So we live in a small rural town, Fort Scott, Kansas. And she was driving somewhere and somebody rear-ended her. You know, boop, just bumped the back of her car. Wasn't a big deal. She got out to go see what was going on, make sure they were okay, see what condition the car was in. But this little fender bender happened right in front of a building where they were doing some training. They were training first responders. And the first responders had just gotten out for lunch break and were just exiting the building, coming out there, and they see this fender bender happen in front of them, this minor accident. These first responders had just been very geared up for training. So they ran over, grabbed my friend, strapped her to one of those boards to make sure that nothing was hurt. They opened the hood of her car, cut the electrical wiring to the battery just to make sure nothing could catch fire. They did all their training things for this minor fender bender, which was probably, yes, it was correct. They were very gung-ho, right? They had just been there through all the training and knew exactly what to do. They were being very efficient and very effective at what they had just been trained to do. Don't worry, we're here to help. However, it wasn't what actually needed to be done at that particular point in time. They were incredibly efficient, incredibly effective at something that didn't actually need to be done. So when we're thinking in terms of the idea that face-to-face communication makes us more efficient and more effective at something, we need to know what we're trying to accomplish. And like I said, this sounds kind of silly, but look at your team, right? Does everyone actually agree on what the goals are that they're trying to achieve? In a lot of cases, they don't. And it's really hard to be efficient and effective in a way that actually gets you toward the goal unless you actually know what's going on. My family's gone, so the dog's telling me she wants more attention here. But okay. Okay, next word. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. The thing I think is interesting about the word method here is that we're actually calling out there are other ways we could communicate, right? And that doesn't mean that we'll never use one of the other ways of communicating. So there are other methods. So what method does your team use to communicate requirements? Do you use face-to-face communication, email or documents, Jira or something similar to that, or phone calls? Those are just the ones I thought of. If you think of another thing that you use that I don't have on here, go ahead and throw it in the chat. You have a problem, I can help. How big shall it become? So it looks a lot of us are using face-to-face communication to actually communicate requirements. A bunch of people put things in Jira too. These are all methods that we can use for communication. Agile does not say it's very, very bad to use Jira to communicate requirements. It does say that the most efficient and effective means of communicating to and within the development team is going to be face-to-face. And so we should have that in our mind. Now, maybe for some reason we think it doesn't matter in this particular place, so we want to use Jira. But if we're looking for more efficiency and more effectiveness, we ought to tend toward communicating face-to-face for these things. What method does your team usually use to prioritize work? You usually prioritize your work with face-to-face conversations. Is somebody going in and ranking stuff in Jira or voting for it there? Is it done over email? Is it done over chat? So you use all of them. Okay, cool. What's your, so I guess the question should be, what's the primary way you do things? Combination Jira and face-to-face. Okay, cool. And if there's something I missed, go and throw it in the chat too. I'd like to see that. And when I'm talking about face-to-face, if we can see each other's face and talk to each other, I'm considering that face-to-face. That doesn't mean we never want to have in person, but we can do face-to-face over video. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between having a video call and like a video team room. Let's see how we're doing time. Okay, cool. Okay, so most of us are using face-to-face for prioritizing work, which means if you're doing that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, you're using what Agile says is the most efficient, effective way to actually have that type of interaction. What does your team use to communicate during development? What's the primary way that your team communicates during development? So a lot of places are using chat, and chat can be very effective for some things. One thing I would encourage you to do or think about with your team, I may have had a slide about this later, but I'll mention it here while you fill this out. If we can enable a way to have friction-free face-to-face communication to where I can always talk with the rest of my team, we're right there where we can see each other, I can then choose to use other things when it's more appropriate. So I've seen teams that they're all in a team room together and somebody will throw something in a chat because there's a conversation taking place and what they've got is more of kind of off the, it's a different conversation. They need feedback on it, but it's not urgent. If you're in a situation where you don't have that friction-free face-to-face, and it's like, okay, let's set up a meeting for something, then these other things start becoming more, get used more simply because there's a barrier to having face-to-face conversation. Whoops, went the wrong way. Okay. The most efficient and effective method of, so this is what we're saying the face-to-face communication is good for, and it's good for conveying information. So when I was thinking about this, here's an example of conveying information. So we got this girl on the left is thinking of something. She's thinking of a Vikings hat. Now, that's not really what Vikings wore. The reason we think of them as Vikings hats is because Wagner used them in The Ring of the Nibelung, and so that's what everybody thinks Vikings wore, but I don't think they actually wore horns on their heads. Anyway, she's and Astrid, you may know better. You may have actually gone to the big 30-hour production of The Ring of the Nibelung or something there in Germany. Anyway, she's thinking of this in her mind, right? We're talking about conveying information. So she's going to send an email that says, I'm thinking of a hat with things that curve up on either side, okay? So she's trying to convey information. So she sends that as an email, and the gentleman gets it. Okay, so what she's just done is the most efficient and effective method of sending words to and within a development. That's not what it says. It says conveying information. And in this picture here, conveying information is not necessarily the same as sending words. We want to convey information. The idea is there's something firing in your head that's producing an image and an idea, and you want to convey that information, which means you're getting that into somebody else's head, so their brain fires off in a similar enough way that there's a huge amount of overlap between what you're thinking and what they're thinking. And it's amazing that this works at all, right, when you actually think of what's happening. But in this case, she sends it, and he thinks of, okay, a hat with things that curve up on either side. So he's thinking a cowboy hat. That's not at all what she was thinking of. On the other hand, if we're actually having a conversation, face-to-face conversation, she can say a hat with things that curve up on either side. And he's thinking, okay, what's that? Here's a bunch of hats curve up on either side. So it's like, okay, so felt curves up on the sides. She can see he's confused. And so she said, no, it's metal with horns. Okay, he's got it. They're now thinking about the same thing. And when we're thinking about conveying information, this is what we're wanting to do, right? Getting the thing from one person's mind to another. And it's an amazing thing that it can work at all. If rapidly getting that information from one person to another is valuable to our project, email is probably not a good way to do it for most things where we need rapid feedback, because this type of communication needs to happen. This is even more important when we are talking about developers that are needing to understand what the business is asking for, and it's maybe in a domain that they don't work with every day. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. So Agile is saying if you're wanting to get information into developers' heads, this is the most efficient way to do it. If you need to transfer information between your brain and the brains of people on the development team, go talk to them, right? Have the conversation. And one of the reasons is because when we think about trying to take natural language and actually get it working in code, and behavior-driven development helps a lot with this because it kind of forces those conversations to happen. There's a lot of back and forth that needs to occur in order to make sure that there's clarity and make sure that there's understanding. Because you can ask for something and a developer can build exactly what you ask for and it not be anything like what you want, because there's so many ambiguities in English language. If you could ask for something precise enough that the developer could just build it and be exactly what you want with that level of precision, it would be more efficient for you just to code it yourself, because that's what you're doing with code, and is taking things and making it to where it's no longer ambiguous. The face-to-face communication is what helps make sure that we are having that back and forth. Okay, we got a good comment here. I'm not sure I agree with this. We convey requirements both face-to-face and Jira. Sometimes the face-to-face will have more information than Jira, but when this occurs, most people simply forget what they were told in that face-to-face conversation. Then again, most people don't read most of the requirements that are written down either, but at least I can point to that and say, you missed this part. Let me suggest that the idea of trying to get all your requirements in Jira, the teams I've seen that have been highly effective, Jira becomes a way to prioritize work more than it becomes a way to keep track of your requirements. And which isn't to say you never should put any requirements there. If you've got a document like, oh, here's the file format for this, that's great, get it in there. But the teams that are really efficient and effective, in my experience, and this is what the Agile Manifesto is saying as well, are the ones that actually have a conversation around that. So, for example, and this is where behavior-driven development maps very nicely to the Agile principles. You've used Jira to say, this is the next most important thing that can be done. Here's all the things we're going to leave out of it. This is the next most important thing that can be done. When we have capacity to work on it, we all get together, we talk through exactly what it means, talk through if there's anything we want to leave out, any edge cases. We've got somebody from business, we've got testers, and we've got developers there. We all make sure we're on the same page right before the developer starts working on it. And I know that that's a very different way of thinking about things sometimes, but the teams I've seen that have done that get to the point that they can very rapidly, they're able to deliver value all the way through to the business a lot more rapidly than any other way I've seen teams do that. So I'm not saying you never put anything in Jira, but this idea of actually talking through it rather than saying just go look in the documentation can make a huge difference in your cycle time of delivering through to production and getting it into the hands of the user. But that's I understand where you're coming from. I'm just suggesting that having seen both, worked in both environments, one is dramatically more efficient. Most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. So not only is it saying this is the best way to get stuff from kind of outside the team into the developers' minds, but it's also the best way for the development team to work. This is a conversation I had at a stand-up I was running one time. So they were using the thing to ask what people accomplished. So okay, what did you accomplish yesterday? I ran into a blocker on something Bob knows about. Okay, sounds good. So was Bob able to help you? I was waiting until the stand-up to ask him. And this was a very kind of confusing thing, but this person had decided that the stand-up was the place that they were going to wait to have, and he, granted, he was going to talk to him face-to-face at the stand-up, but he wasn't just going out and finding him and having a conversation about it. And in this particular case, they had run into this blocker like right after the day's stand-up. So I'm not sure if they just struggled with it all day or had reports to fill out or whatever. But the point was the rapid communication, getting with the team and having a conversation. Agile is saying this is the best way for teams to communicate. Now, if he had been in the same room with Bob, he very likely would say, hey, Bob, can you help me with this? I don't understand, Bob. Okay, well, here's what you need to do. If he was in separate rooms, it would have taken a little bit more effort to go walk down the hall. Now, let's say that they're both remote. If they're both remote and they're working, completely separately, and maybe they've got a chat, or maybe they don't even have that, they have email, it would be a lot easier for this individual to say, I'll just wait to talk to him at stand-up instead of starting an email chain back and forth. If they've got a chat open, that might be a little bit better, right? It might be a little bit more efficient. If they're all working together in a video team room, it's a lot easier for them to say, hey, I see Bob's free. Bob just looked up from something. Hey, Bob, can you help me with this? Or he may see Bob's busy and type it in the chat. But that visual communication is very important in making these types of things work efficiently. Okay, so we're talking about to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. Why is development team specifically called out here? So I see Lori's got a really good comment here that meeting and discussing things is not wasting people's time. And this is, I think that's a very good point, because you can get to the point where you're trying to, if I need to talk to you, right, we've got this thing we need to talk about, and so we're trying to schedule on each other's calendars, and the only time I can schedule is 2 weeks in the future. I've now got a huge long cycle time to try to get to that point. On the other hand, if we're all working, if there is a virtual team room that I'm in on video working with the rest of the team, and you've got a question or something you need to talk about, and you just pop in and we just have the conversation just like you happen to walk into my office or the team room I was working in, that's a very, very different dynamic. So in a lot of cases, you want to try to mimic this idea of I can just pop in and ask a question versus I can set up a meeting. So sometimes the resistance I hear from people is that they're saying, I don't want to set up yet another meeting, my schedule's full, and it's going to be a long time before we can actually set up the meeting anyway. Now, sometimes there are good ways to do meetings, but there are good reasons for doing meetings. But I've seen like teams that are working, so you got 8 developers that may be working together, they're all in one video team room, they break out into other team rooms if there's too much crosstalk and they're, a couple of them are working on things together. But you've got this one team room, video team room that most people are on. Well, when they start working with another group, like let's say they're working with security or something like that, and security, they say, hey, we need security to come help us with this or something. You could set up a meeting with security, or you could tell them, hey, when you have a few minutes free this afternoon, we'll have people in the team room the entire time. Just jump over into this video team room and let's talk through this just whenever you happen to be free. That enables a lot more rapid cycles than trying to set up meetings at some point in the future. So it's something to think about. Okay, because developers will probably have questions. Yes, exactly right. It's not because Agile is only interested in the development team. Although the focus of Agile is development team, and it's not to make the developers feel more important. But the point is, if you actually have, if you're trying to convey something to the development team, chances are the reason we have developers that are skilled in writing things in code in the first place is because they will ask the types of questions that will take the English things that are ambiguous and turn them into code, which means it's very likely they're going to have a conversation with you about something. If a business comes in and says, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z, and the developer says, hey, you know, X and Y are really easy, but Z is probably computationally impossible, that conversation ought to happen right then. And the business say, oh, you know what? That's okay. We'll wait and figure that out later. If X and Y are easy to do and you can give me this next week, that's really, really valuable to me. Or they may say, you know, really Z is the only part of this that's valuable. Let's stop everything, because if we can't do this, there's no way this product is going to be successful in the market. But those are conversations that can happen much more efficiently over talking to each other than trying to send emails back and forth. Most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. The idea is that we can see each other's faces. We're going to show a video in just a second, and one of the things it mentions is that based on some studies, under certain circumstances, up to half the communication is visual, like is what we see with each other. So how much harder is your team going to have to work without being able to see each other's face, see face to face? And for a lot of things, it's going to be a lot harder. Now, if you're just telling everybody, hey, it's so-and-so's birthday, and we're going to, you know, announce the lunch or whatever. We're doing something new, or we just met our sales goal. Does that make sense to go out on email? Maybe. Maybe it doesn't really matter for moving the project forward. But if you're communicating things that are really important to the project, you're going to have a harder time if you're not investing in face-to-face. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. It doesn't just say is face-to-face. It says face-to-face conversation. Now, conversation implies that there's back and forth happening, right? So here's just a still screenshot. This is the announcement of King Charles, that he was made king, right? And I was going to try to show the video, but it was a little bit long. So they come out, they're all decked out, trumpets playing stuff, and they read this long proclamation. This is not a conversation, right? They are communicating this information in a very, very formal way to people. This isn't a good way to kind of have back and forth discussion about, well, what's Charles going to do about as a king? You know, do we want Charles? You know, all those things. Those aren't happening as part of this. This is not conversation. This is just spreading information out. And I like how Agile really focuses that the goal here is to have a conversation. There should be back and forth happening. If you're not actually having conversation, if you're giving developers things to do and they're doing it without having conversations with you about trade-off, you're probably not developing in a very efficient way, because there's so much knowledge that the developers have about what's easy and what's hard. And if you don't have that information, if the business doesn't have that information to kind of steer what they do next and what piece to deliver and stuff, it's not going to be an efficient way of working. Okay, so let's see how we're doing time. Oh, great, perfect. So here is Agile Principle number 6, a cartoon take. It's about 10 minutes long, I think, on looking at what that looks like with some absurd examples that hopefully will help you remember it. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. While words are very important, there's a lot more to communication than just the words you choose. Body language and tone convey a great deal of meaning, and in some situations, most of what is communicated is nonverbal. Consider this sentence: I do not have a problem with you. If you get an email with that single line, it could mean a number of different things. But if you are talking to someone in person, you'll have a lot better idea of what they might actually mean. I do not have a problem with you might mean that the speaker has a problem with someone else. I do not have a problem with you means someone else has a problem with you, or that the speaker thinks you have a problem with them. I do not have a problem with you might mean that they think your mere existence is the singular greatest travesty to occur in the world, and that this burden of your continuation of living is felt by all humanity, and their feelings on the matter aren't their own, but are a fact known by the entire human race. And that is just how words are vocalized. Facial expressions and body language often carry even more information about what is being communicated that goes way beyond just the words being said. Some studies have suggested that in certain situations, the actual words only account for 7% of what is necessary to understand the meaning, and the vocalizations account for 38%. In those situations, 55% of what people need to know to correctly understand the intent of the speaker comes from being able to see the speaker's face and body language. Of course, these types of studies are testing for specific types of communication, so the exact percentages can be debated. There's a big difference between someone shouting out a number telling you that your order is ready and someone making a marriage proposal. But the fact remains, a huge part of the way we communicate is non-verbally. If you aren't convinced, imagine trying to communicate the way scuba divers do, by writing on whiteboards underwater while your facial expressions are covered by a mask. It isn't that you can't communicate. You definitely can warn your fellow divers that they're about to be eaten by a shark. Though, even without vocal and facial expressions, you've still got your nonverbal body language, which will probably play a huge part in warning them of their imminent demise. But no one is going to describe this type of communication as efficient and effective, and it definitely isn't going to be a good way to have nuanced back and forth discussions about where to have lunch, much less about the intricacies of complex software development. Communication isn't just from the speaker to the listener. It goes both ways. When people can see each other, the person listening is sending all kinds of feedback to the speaker, letting them know if they understood, encourage them to speed up or slow down, and asking for clarification, all without saying a word, all by their expression and body language. While this is important in normal conversations, the intricacies of talking about software make it all the more vital. When we are talking about developing software, there are all kinds of ambiguities between what gets said in English and how we represent things in code. The less real-time feedback we have between people communicating, the more effort is going to be required and the more ambiguities will persist. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. Notice that it doesn't say that it is impossible to communicate in any way other than face-to-face. It just says that anything else is going to be less effective and less efficient. One place where this comes up is when people are working remotely. Development team, you can just send emails, right? Absolutely. But it will be less effective and less efficient than doing a video call where you can see each other. Now, there's definitely some communication where effectiveness and efficiency don't really matter. If you want to remind your team that tomorrow is a holiday, is it more effective and more efficient to schedule a meeting so you can see each other face to face? Maybe, but does it matter? Is the effectiveness of conveying information face to face greater than the overhead of having the meeting? Probably not. The thing about communicating to and within a development team is that most things are not simply speaking some facts that others will absorb. There is back and forth, confusion that needs to be clarified, plans that need to be parsed, and ideas that need to be negotiated. Communication with a development team isn't just conveying information. It's a complex activity that builds complicated structures in the mind. For example, let's say that a business wants to explain how a new feature needs to work. For all but the simplest functionality, the back and forth conversation around a feature will refine the definition of the feature and create the shared understanding necessary to actually create the code. For example, let's say that the business says they need their point of sale system to support returns. That may sound like a straightforward request, but the developers may ask if a person can return something even if they weren't the one who bought it. The business may say that yes, they want people to be able to return gifts, but then it brings up the question of whether there is a risk people might return things they purchased elsewhere.
So does it require a receipt? Or is there an expectation that the system keep track of sales so they don't need a receipt? Maybe the business and developers will agree that the first feature just needs to allow the return of items when the customer does have a receipt, and then they will come up with features for other types of returns that might be more complicated. The whole process would be very inefficient over email or even over a telephone call. And it isn't just because the business needs to learn to write more detailed emails to have better process. It's because the back and forth is the efficient way to work out the behavior of software. So how does this principle apply to situations where people are working remotely? Being in person is always going to be the gold standard for face-to-face communication. But video conferencing and telepresence technology has gotten surprisingly good over the last decade. I've worked with teams that fully embrace video rooms as a replacement for team rooms and get great results for a distributed team. I've also been on teams where people vowed to never come on video. Some people seem to have a bit of a cultural resistance to working in a video team room. There's always a certain amount of fear of the unknown. When people are in person, we don't worry about people being able to see us. But if you have a camera pointed at you, and imagine that it is like someone sitting right above your monitor, staring at you unblinkingly with a big cyclops eye, well, you could probably come up with a scenario that will creep you out on being in a video team room. Another complaint I've heard of working face-to-face over video is that it feels exhausting. There is some research that says that some people find that seeing themselves on video is exhausting, so shutting off the self view helps. I personally prefer to be able to see what I look like to everyone else, but that probably stems from the time I went on TV without realizing that I had mud smeared all across my face, an experience that I hope isn't in most people's repertoire. Having a separate monitor or a dedicated video conferencing device for the window to the rest of your team can help avoid the feeling that people are watching you that you can't see because their window is behind the one you're working on. But even with a great video conference setup, at the end of a full day of working with the team face-to-face, I'm usually more exhausted than a day working solo. But the same is true of working a full day hands-on with a team in a physical team room. Whether in person or on video, processing the additional information that comes from working with a team face-to-face is going to take more energy. Remember how we said that up to 55% of the communication comes from being able to see people as they spoke? You've got a lot more information to process when you can see people over video versus just a phone call. So if we can just turn off 55% of communication, we'll be less tired at the end of the day? Well, maybe if your goal is to optimize for processing as little information as possible. But that might be at odds with the goal of, I don't know, whatever it is that your job is supposed to actually produce. Imagine if you showed up for an all-day team working session and the organizer said, "Since we've discovered that working together all day can be exhausting, we are going to try to limit the amount of communication you will need to process by removing the visual channel. You'll find a paper bag at your seat. Please place it over your head. This should block out up to 55% of the communication you'd normally need to process and make the day less tiring." That would seem silly, and you'd question the point of the meeting. But many teams take a similar approach to avoiding face-to-face communication in the way they work together while remote. That isn't to say there's no development work that can happen on an individual level, but if you're doing something where communication to and within the development team plays an important role, then Agile says that you will increase your effectiveness and efficiency by doing it face-to-face. Hashing out requirements, troubleshooting issues, doing pair programming, etc. are all communication activities that are made more effective and efficient by face-to-face communication. Keep in mind, Agile doesn't say that you must do every communication activity that way, just that there are benefits to prioritizing it. Agile Principle number 6. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation.
Okay, well, hopefully that was a fun video and just absurd enough to make it to where things stick in your mind. I see somebody was saying you want to try using the paper bag method. I have my doubts whether that'll work, but if you have a good way of measuring whether things are working well or not, that sounds like a great thing to try if it works out well. Or if you try it, let me know, just because I'm interested how that would work with paper bags over our heads. My point was that's probably not what you want to do, but okay, so the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. The lower the friction of face-to-face communication, the easier it is for people to choose how to communicate instead of just going to email because the other options are really hard. They'd have to set up a video meeting or something like that. That's where the idea of having a video team room where people are just hanging out and working together, even if they're all working on their own things, it can be very, very effective. So here's some questions to ask. Are people located in the same part of the building? If they're not, that's a barrier to face-to-face communication. Is there a persistent video room that people are joined and working in that people know they can jump into to interact with the team? Do people know how to find the team? If they want to have face-to-face communication and they can't find them, that's going to be hard. I was working with a team that had they had team rooms in 4 places across the United States, and then usually about 5 people joining remotely into those. And there was everybody had a big screen or their own separate monitor that they were working with. And I was going to San Francisco and I needed escorted up to the team room. And I got there and needed to let people know, well, instead of calling someone or chatting or something like that, this video team room I connected to on my phone and said, hey, is somebody in San Francisco that can come down and get me? And so they heard it. But it was very interesting to see how that team room just became a place that anyone could jump into from any time to either ask questions if they were on the team, or other people that the team was interacting with could join. In-person builds a foundation for effective video face-to-face. In-person enhances the video. Video doesn't replace in-person, meaning if you've never met people face-to-face, it's going to be hard to develop a deep relationship with people that you need to work really efficiently together if you've never seen each other face-to-face. Shared meals, happy hours, things like that are very important. There was a team I worked with and we had formed during COVID, so no one saw each other. And finally we got to a point where we all got to be together, and we were all in, or many of us were in an elevator together, and somebody looked around and said, our heights are a lot different than what I was guessing, because on video, everybody looks about the same height. Then we had one person that was really tall and somebody else that was really short. And anyway, it was just an interesting observation that we hadn't been together yet after working together for like a year or so. So how do you know that face-to-face communication is working? Well, it should be that you're delivering software, right? But here's some things that I've seen on teams that are very, very effective of using this, particularly with using a video team room, but if you're in person too. But if you have conversations about the weather, that's a good indication that your video or your communication medium is becoming unobtrusive. I remember one time we had somebody that had studied meteorology in San Francisco and people on another team room in Philadelphia. And the person with the meteorology background was commenting because he was looking out the window through the video thing, seeing out the window and saying, wow, that looks like a big storm that's happening there. And it was just really interesting to see that the friction of the video channel had gotten so low that they were noticing weather behind with each other. Talking about the weekend, right? If people show up in the morning and talk like they would if they were just walking into the team room, that's a good indication that you have a low friction way of communication. Questions about what's behind them. I had one guy I was working with, and we're looking at like, what is that back there with this big green thing back behind you? He went back and got it, and he had a life-size, like the monster from Frankenstein head sitting behind him. He was like, yeah, I found this out. He was really excited about it and stuff. But those are the types of conversations that mean it's not just like, oh, we're having a meeting. It's an idea that the friction is very, very low. Have you met each other's pets? Yes. Yes, that was Roger with the Frankenstein head. Have you met each other's pets, right? And it may sound funny, but I find a good indication of how cohesive a team is if you know each other's pets' names. It means that you probably work together in a way that is actually low friction in the way that you're communicating and being able to see each other. I had a gentleman I was working with, and he was talking about his dog and a trick. So he showed me the trick that his dog did. And a few weeks later, I taught my dog the trick. So I showed our dog the trick. So it's It's another thing. I'm not saying that the goal of having face-to-face is to meet each other's pets. I'm just suggesting that if you're seeing those things, that is a very good sign that you're headed in the right direction with getting the friction out of the way of being able to see and talk to each other. Okay, quiz time. We're going to look at some of the things we covered and give away a copy of a very fitting shirt of "We Value Face-to-Face Communication. Turn your video on." So join the quiz. I will throw a link in the chat for anyone that didn't get it earlier. The idea of teams wanting to work, or people wanting to work individually on teams, pair programming or mob programming can be really, really scary. And I say that as someone that has a lot of development experience, but when I go in and work with a new team, people I don't know, and I'm trying to lead by example and say, okay, well, let me program, you guys tell me how to do it and help walk me through it. It's terrifying. And that's a hard thing to get over. Now, the teams I've seen that go ahead and go through that get to the point where, I mean, I had one gentleman tell me the other day, he was on a team where we had gone through that process and they got very, very efficient. When he rolled off to some other things on some other projects, he's like, "Yeah, Mark, you've ruined me. I don't like working the way I used to work anymore. I like interacting with people. It feels good. It's the way I like to work now, and I don't know if I can find another place like this." So it's very valuable, but it can be a hard thing to get there. There's now I'll save that story for another time. Okay, are we ready? Got 5 more seconds to join. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, let's go. Okay, so click the answer as fast as you can. So this is just a speed thing. How fast can you click the answer? This was just a fun one I threw in. We're actually going to talk about stuff related to it. So can you click the answer? Faster gets more points. All right, 100% of you got it right. Okay, very good. Okay, let's see. Did I put a leaderboard on? Oh, yes. So Astrid is the fastest clicker here at 4 seconds, followed by Christopher, Gabrielle, Andre, and Jennifer. Moving on. Conveying information means writing detailed instructions, producing oral documentation, giving everyone a place to look up their questions, or taking patterns in a person's... What does conveying information mean? So yes, taking patterns in one person's mind and replicating them in someone else's mind. And the point of this is just make sure that we're thinking about communication, not just can I broadcast, but can I actually duplicate the patterns here? And that may even go also back and forth. Remember the thing with the Viking helmet? She's thinking of a Viking helmet. He's thinking of a cowboy hat. Once they have a conversation, they get to the point that there's the same view in each of their minds. Leaderboard, Tim's in the top spot. When using a video team room, what can help alleviate the feeling of being watched? Wear a paper bag over your head, use a separate monitor for the window to the team, get a spy camera, or play music. One of these was the one that we mentioned as being a good solution to this problem. It was not the paper bag, just to make sure no one's confused. As far as this having video on this, if people want to have their video on, it's great because I love seeing people. At the same time, I know a lot of us are eating lunch and things like that, and it's not like we're trying to have. It's not a complete dialogue back and forth just because we've got a large number of people. It's more of a one to many and then talking in the chat. So I'm fine with whatever people want to do. Okay, so yes, use a separate monitor for the window to the team. That's the answer. The idea is if I know you're behind where I'm programming and you can see me but I can't see you, that is much, much more uncomfortable. And if I've got a window here with the camera on top of it and I can look over here and talk to the team and I can look over here and do this and I can see you and you can see me, that makes it a lot more comfortable. So investing in another monitor. I personally like having a completely separate standalone device for my window into the team. One, so I can reboot or do anything I need to on my computer without shutting that down. And also with devices that boot faster and things where I can just come in and click a button and I'm in the team room. Saying that face-to-face communication is most efficient means Everyone will prefer this method of communication. The investment is turned into value with less waste than other methods. Teams should vote on how to work together, or it should be part of company policy. So yes, the investment is turned into value with less waste than other methods. Now, the interesting thing is that everyone prefer this method of communication. My experience has been when people have actually tried it on a team that's delivering regularly and following the other Agile principles, I find that most people do tend to prefer working that way. But if you just ask people who have never experienced it, no, they're not going to rather be heads down without interacting. They'd probably prefer to have their own office to working in a team room. They'd probably prefer working home offline to working with other people over video conference. Just because it's more comfortable that way, because there's less risk. You don't have to be as vulnerable. Why is face-to-face conversation so important for discussing requirements with developers? Is it because they will likely have clarifying questions, because they won't read their emails? It helps them be more social, to make sure they're working hard, or to help you remember their names? One of these answers was mentioned as the most correct answer. So yes, they will likely have clarifying questions, right? Face-to-face conversation, you can come in and, for example, come in developers say, hey, we need to build a scheduling system in our software. And the developer says, that's going to take some work. We can definitely do it. But don't you have that capability in Microsoft Exchange? And business goes, oh, do we? And the developer says, yes, we use it for scheduling our stuff. Maybe you should try that. And if that works, it doesn't work, then we'll build it. I've actually had that conversation with people wanting me to build scheduling systems before. So that's a real conversation we've had. Okay, 2 more questions. We got Tizzy in the top space, followed by Tim, Ruth, Betsy, and Maureen. Blank face-to-face helps lay the foundation for effective blank face-to-face. So structured face-to-face helps lay the foundation for effective creative face-to-face. Academic face-to-face lays the foundation for effective industry face-to-face. Smiling face-to-face helps lay the foundation for effective contorted face-to-face, or in-person face-to-face lays the foundation for effective video face-to-face. And yes, in-person lays the foundation for effective video face-to-face. There's nothing that's going to replace hanging out with people and talking to them, just getting to know them and getting that foundation for being able to work together. Okay, congratulations, Tizzy. You win the shirt. Send me an email of what size you want. If you want a previous shirt, I think you got a book. If you want a previous shirt, let me know and we'll come up with a different prize. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Great to talk to everyone. I have a, let's see. Don't know if the QA thing worked correctly. I guess it didn't. Okay, I'll stick around for a few more minutes if anyone wants to chat. Thank you so much for coming. I'll have another invite coming out here soon. I'm working on a pair programming and TDD demo with my teenage son actually pair programming with me. We've been practicing on that to see how we put that together. So look forward to doing that here pretty soon. If anybody wants to chat about anything related to this or anything else, dog training tips or whatever, feel free to come off mute and we'll talk. Everyone else, hope to see you next week.
Thank you, Mark. Great here. I remember one of our meetings, you talked about a committee of practice. Was that created? Is it still in the pipeline?
I've looked at some things. I've been looking at some tools like Mighty Networks and things like that to see about creating something, or even just a persistent messaging thing in WebEx. I do not have anything in place yet, but if I do, I will make sure I market it well to everyone, so you'll definitely hear about it on email.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
You're welcome.
Any other thoughts, concerns, aggravations, ideas?
Hey, Mark, just saying hi.
Hey, good to see you, Lisa. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Great. I like you. You recognized it was Roger with the